Support comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hey there, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. Tech workers are in demand. Need proof? Yesterday, Amazon announced it's doubling maximum base pay for tech and corporate employees to $350,000 a year. The company says it's trying to stay competitive. We'll get the backstory from GeekWire's Todd Bishop. But first, let's get you caught up. A reminder for Seattle voters, your ballot is due again. 2 school funding measures this time. One provides funding for things like teachers and staff, art, special education, and STEM programs. The other one pays for building maintenance and updates, athletic projects, and technology access for students. You should know the drill since we've voted 3 times in the past 4 months, but if you don't, your ballot needs to either be in the mail with today's postmark or in a drop box by 8 o'clock tonight. This next one is more of a mystery than a news story, but it looks like KUOW is jamming radios in Mazdas across Western Washington. A handful of Mazda owners wrote in over the past few days to ask why their car radios are playing KUOW and only KUOW. Apparently, there's an issue between KUOW's signal and Mazda's computer systems. KUOW says it's aware of the issue and working with the company that handles HD radio technology to figure it out. So keep it tuned to KUOW for updates. And to the Mazda drivers who have no choice, sorry, we're working on it. And we're in for a pretty sweet week if you've been bummed out by the rain. Forecasters are predicting highs in the 50s through the weekend. Now, don't conflate dry with sunny. That would be a rookie mistake. The clouds will be in and out all week. A quick content warning if you're currently trying to buy a house in Seattle. This conversation might make your blood pressure hit the roof. Yep, we are talking about the city's tech economy and Amazon. The company announced yesterday it will double the maximum base pay for its corporate and tech workers from $160,000 to $350,000 a year. Sure to have impacts here, both for Amazon's workers and for the metro area that's already struggling with affordability. Todd Bishop is a tech journalist and the co-founder of GeekWire. He's here to explain what's going on. Todd, really glad to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely, Trish. Pleasure to be on.
So is this why my Prime membership is going up?
It's funny. I know that might sound like a joke, but it's not hard to draw a line between this announcement of the increase in pay and Amazon's news last week that it will actually increase the annual cost of Prime by $20. This is part of an overall effort by Amazon to retain employees both in warehouses and here in Seattle and elsewhere where you've got the corporate and tech employees. And Prime and the increase in the cost of Prime was in part an effort to increase their revenue. And so there is a direct connection between the two.
Yeah. Let's talk about what's happening. Amazon is boosting maximum base pay to $350,000 a year. And that's the maximum. So it doesn't really mean everybody gets that. But we're also just talking about base pay, which is part of a whole package of compensation that includes stocks and bonuses. So I'm curious, why are they doing it and how did they land at $350,000?
Amazon traditionally has offered a lower base pay than many of its peers. So when you're talking about Amazon's peers, of course, you're talking about Microsoft and Facebook, Apple and Google. They've made up the difference through the other components that you just mentioned, the sign-on bonus and restricted stock units. This seems to be an effort to create more reliability, more consistency, because when you base a large portion of somebody's compensation on stock rather than salary, it can really fluctuate wildly with the stock market. And we have, in fact, seen Amazon stock go down by roughly 30% over the past 6 to 9 months. It went up quite a bit after their really strong earnings last week. But this seems to be overall an effort by Amazon to adjust how employees are paid, how much they get overall in compensation. It's certainly going up. And as a result, be able to compete more effectively for new employees and retain more of the employees that they already have.
You talked a little bit about retaining employees. Has Amazon actually been losing people, or is there a reason that this move is important for them?
There's been some great reporting on this by Ashley Stewart and her colleagues at Insider, the online site, that documented what looked like an exodus, partial exodus of Amazon executives, high-ranking engineers last year, especially around the transition from Jeff Bezos as CEO to Andy Jassy, the new CEO. And while that's pretty natural as part of any kind of big corporate transition there in the executive suite, I think Amazon has never been known as the most cushy, friendly place to work. It can be, as the New York Times put it in its story 7 years ago that got a lot of attention, it can be a pretty bruising workplace. And this is, I think, in part a response to that. So yes, they have been seeing some exodus. Of course, that's been somewhat typical of this whole Great Resignation era, but there's some evidence to suggest that Amazon is seeing it at a greater degree than other companies.
All right. Well, I would be happy to hear this news if I worked a white-collar job at Amazon. What have you heard from folks inside the company?
As you might expect, there is some skepticism. Like journalists, tech employees can be cynics. There are questions internally about whether Amazon truly is increasing that overall compensation. In other words, when they move the base salary up for employees, are they truly going to keep the stock compensation and the bonus the same? Or might they try to reduce it overall? Now, Amazon is very clear. There was an internal document that we saw at GeekWire that explained that they're planning to increase overall compensation ranges for most jobs globally. And so that means overall compensation. Employees are not convinced. And there's also, from what I've seen in some online forums that I follow, a little bit of, yeah, money's nice, but we want to make sure that this overall workplace is a great place to work. And especially here with office workers, at least working from home, this tends to be something that's really more in the realm of work-life balance, making sure that the employees want to make sure that they're, getting an overall place of work that's a good place to work, not just good pay.
Right. A lot goes into employee satisfaction, Todd. That is for sure. How many people are we talking about here that would be impacted by this?
In the Seattle region, it's in the range of 75,000 to 80,000 people in the Seattle region, and most of those are corporate and tech workers. So many of those will be impacted by this change. On a global scale, Amazon employs overall about 1.6 million people as of December 31st. Many of those, in fact, the majority of those are fulfillment and distribution workers, but about 250,000 of the global total is in corporate and tech jobs, and about 70 to 80,000 people here in the Seattle region.
Okay. I'm curious if there's any risk for Amazon in making this leap, in increasing this potential base salary and compensation.
Absolutely. The risk is that it does not have the impact that they want in terms of retaining their best employees while also increasing their costs by quite a bit. I asked for an estimate on how much this is going to increase their overall costs, and they did not give an answer. But we saw in Amazon's fourth quarter results last week, if not for Amazon Web Services, the company's cloud division, Amazon as a company would have posted a significant loss. And this is a situation where in some ways Amazon's got a little bit of an ATM, a cash machine in the form of Amazon Web Services. Now, for many other companies, that doesn't exist. So it's not entirely fair to some of these other companies like startups that might be competing with Amazon. But the risk is that they would spend a lot of money. It wouldn't have the impact that they would want in terms of retaining the best employees. And they could be left with those higher expenses and still not the impact that they want.
Sure. And I mentioned this at the very top, Todd. Seattle is already a pretty expensive place to live. We hear stories every week about houses selling for $500,000 over asking. This news doesn't seem like it's going to help with that situation.
It does not. And I do think that it's a real risk that this type of massive change in compensation, in the reliability of the compensation, could impact those situations. And many of us have experienced it. You go out and somebody comes in with a cash offer and it's very difficult to buy a house. It, of course, also impacts the rental market. This clearly has gone beyond the realm of theory in terms of the impact of Amazon and other tech companies on the housing market and just the overall cost of living. We're in an inflationary period right now, and this really is the kind of thing that could have more of an impact. Longtime Seattle residents will remember that there was something similar on a smaller scale back in the 90s and early 2000s with Microsoft back in the days of stock options. And interestingly, Microsoft did something similar when their share price under Steve Ballmer started plateauing. They moved away from stock options to actual shares. They granted shares to employees, and it was a similar kind of landmark moment. And so in that way, it's also a sign of Amazon's maturity as a company in some ways, and the fact that they know that they're not going to keep growing forever to the extent that they can use the stock compensation as their own tool.
You know, we talked a little bit about the effect that this might have on the economy here. There are a lot of people in this town trying to make it on much less than the salaries we are talking about, Todd. I am curious how this trickles down to them and their lives here beyond trying to secure housing.
Right. In many respects, in the past, we would have looked at this and said, well, this is great for the service economy. This creates restaurant jobs. It creates janitorial jobs. It creates jobs that would at least be ideally, and I realize it's not always the case, but ideally gainful employment that someone could use to live on in this city, in this ideal fantasy world. But the issue right now is with the pandemic, not as many of those jobs exist. Now, Amazon has taken steps to support businesses in its neighborhood in particular. They've spent millions of dollars, so clearly they're trying to compensate for that on the other side of it. But that larger economic impact is not as pronounced these days because of the dynamics of the pandemic.
Well, there certainly are a lot of moving parts to our economy right now. Todd Bishop, co-founder of GeekWire, really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Jason Pagano produced today's show. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.